In this segment, what we're going to do is we're going to cover really the history of CRG and the growth of all the tools and resources that we have at CRG beyond the personal style indicator. So in a conversation, we have the privilege of having Dr. Terry Anderson with us today. So we're just going to go through the history of where we added the sales style indicator, the entrepreneurial, the stress indicator and the health planner, the values, the self-worth, the instructional and learning styles, the quick style indicator, the job style indicator. Where did all these tools come from, and the growth and sort of the essence of these different tools, and also some applications. So enjoy this conversation, and we'll be able to have this conversation with Terry as far as how these tools really can apply to you and your application. So welcome, Terry.
Thanks, Ken.
And thanks for spending time with us. You know, the personal style indicator was developed. That was your anchor tool. You got it going, and the response to it was phenomenal. But after that, other tools started to come into the publishing company. So tell us about that journey where, okay, you did the personal style indicator. It was really solely for your students, but it went beyond that. It's something started to happen. So tell us about what happened.
Well, as the personal style indicator started to become known in the business world, we had more and more conversations with business owners or people who wanted to start businesses. And they started saying things like, well, this is, definitely related to my business awareness and performance. But isn't there more you can tell us about our entrepreneurial or sales approaches? And so I made contact with Howard Shenson, who was an expert at that time training other consultants and certifying them to be consultants in California. And he and I had a conversation about the research on entrepreneurship. And at that time, we looked at that, reviewed that research, and found out there were a number of factors that determined entrepreneurial success or failure. Mm-hmm. And so he and I decided to build the entrepreneurial style and success indicator as the second tool after the PSI. And in doing that, we integrated both historical characteristics of a person's life and the personal style aspects together in one tool. And that became very useful to entrepreneurs or people who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs. And I presented at an entrepreneurial conference where other academics who were focused on the development of entrepreneurship were very interested in using it with their students at their universities and have been doing so. So the entrepreneurial style and success indicator became our next tool that we introduced to the marketplace when the company really started to get off the ground and had an office and a receptionist, and it wasn't just Terry working in his basement.
And it's interesting, even now, Terry, so we are scrolling, a couple of decades ahead since that tool was put together. And the latest research in entrepreneurship that has all come out is still validated within the factors that you and Howard had initially determined back then. So it's, and in fact, the research is even validated even more.
Yeah, it has.
And
those factors are still relevant and important when considering making a decision to become an entrepreneur or taking action to plan to become a better entrepreneur.
And not to sidebar, because this could be a long conversation about entrepreneurship, but the latest research when we're doing this taping is that the concept of a career is almost going to be defunct as we move forward. And that each of us are going to be micro entrepreneurs mm-hmm. who bring expertise to come into the marketplace on a contract basis. And that full-time employment will be, for the most part, void, except for certain professions. So the desire, or the requirement to be knowledgeable about my entrepreneurial tendencies mm-hmm. and how I can engage in the marketplace has never been higher than it is now.
Yeah, it's very true. As we look at our graduates from university, and such a high percentage of them at this point in history are having difficulty finding employment, and they're having to start businesses or go work with a business to become entrepreneurial.
So that's great. So we had the entrepreneurial, so we started with the personal style indicator, the entrepreneurial style success indicator. Now the job style indicator was somewhere in there too, wasn't it? Where, and that is a unique tool to CRG where other organizations don't have it, where this isn't about measuring the person.
Right. We had a number of business owners tell us that they would love to be able to have a way to match the person with the jobs they had open more precisely than what they were doing. And so we said, well, if we can query the nature of a person, why can't we query and investigate the nature of a job and have people describe it? So we began experimenting with a word list, and similar to the PSI word list, except it would be words and phrases that describe jobs rather than people.
Mm-hmm.
And we had supervisors use the tool in its first edition to rate a job to see how much consensus they would come to together when they rated the same job. And usually they rated it fairly similarly. Once they achieved that consensus, then they could say, well, these are the work behavioral style requirements of this job. Now let's look for a person who prefers to act those ways. So that a bank teller who has to be very, very task-oriented and accurate in counting and reporting and recording your financial information when you make a deposit also has to shift styles, lean forward and greet you and interact with you, and now banks are requiring their employees to remember your personal name when they see you and greet you. And so they have to shift between task and relationship, task and relationship. Well, if you hire a teller who's completely task-oriented, it's extremely difficult, and they don't want to be relationship-oriented because it's not natural for them, and they don't like it, and that's not what they want to do. They would rather do the accounting side of the job and not the public relations side.
And that's the beauty about the personal style indicator in combination, is now you're talking about compatibility. Compatibility between the person and the position. And in my experience anyways, the majority of employers out there don't do this measurement, Terry. No. They do the standard resume, they do the vetting, and you need to still do it, but they don't establish the nature of the work using a job style indicator.
Right.
And then they wonder when this person comes in, they interviewed well, had the right energy for the interview, but maybe not the right preferences for the job.
Yeah, it's very true. And when there's a person-job mismatch, the stress level goes up, performance level goes down, and that affects the reputation of the company or the bank or whatever kind of an organization it is, and it affects the performance and morale of the employee.
Okay.
So then we found out that it's possible to coach an employee to help them understand what the work behavioral style requirements are, to coach them to stretch into the job more than what they naturally prefer to do if they're willing to try to do that. And if they're not willing to try and do that,
yes,
they have an opportunity to say it. This is the wrong job for me. And we have an opportunity then to help them find a different job role within the same organization, or to help them find another job outside of the organization because they know they don't fit and they don't want to be there.
Well, one of the things, most people will be familiar with Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, where he talks about the right person in the right bus in the right seat doing the right things.
Yes.
However, he does not give you a system to achieve it. And
That's
what the
true.
personal style indicator and the job style indicator together do is to give you a system to be able to have the right person in the right place, given all the other things that you do in HR or hiring practices. But this is a missing component, at least in our opinion, that people need to embrace to be able to get that right person. And the majority of people dislike their work in the marketplace, so there is room for improvement out there.
It gives both employers and employees a common language to talk about the nature of the job and the nature of the employee, and the extent to which there's a match, and an opportunity to do the coaching that's required or needed in order for somebody to stretch into the job role.
Okay, that's great. Well, after the job style indicator, I believe it was the sales style indicator.
Yeah.
And I was just hanging out with you then, back in 1990, 89, whatever that case is. And you, how did you come across Bruce Wares? Where did Bruce Wares was doing the training for Macintosh before it was called Apple?
Yes.
And so how did you get connected with Bruce?
I was at a conference where Bruce was, and I saw his sales presentation, and I thought it was fantastic. The best sales training I'd ever seen. And so I just went up to him and I said, Bruce, I really like what you're doing, and I really like the materials that you've written. I respected his writing ability. And I said, look, I'd like you to take a look at this personal style indicator and this entrepreneurial style and success indicator. and see if you might be interested in partnering with us to develop this sales style indicator that would have a particular slant and integrating your expertise and experience in sales training and your knowledge about sales into this tool. He got very excited. And so we decided to go ahead with that and partner in the same way that I did with Howard Shenson.
And it was interesting because I was around at that time that many times we would have people calling the company, and there would be sales managers wanting to have sales training. And at that time, before the SSI or the sales style indicator was done, you said, well, just take the personal style indicator and adjust it. But sales managers want to have sales on the cover.
Yeah.
They want to have the paragraphs, because in the in-depth interpretations, there's a special paragraph that says, here are the training recommendations for this profile or pattern that are unique to this pattern. So it really gives you a coaching tool. It helps individuals understand their selling style, as well as then giving a full model to understand your customer's buying style.
Yes, and that's where the whole style shifting concept came into being, is for both the personal style, the entrepreneurial, and the sales style, is that we realized there was an opportunity for people to not only develop versatility in their style behaviors, whether they're being or selling or entrepreneuring, but they could learn to develop more flexibility in how they approach individuals or various situations, and they could actually learn some guidelines to do that. And those have been very helpful to people, no question.
Right. Well, I have to tell this story here because we developed the program, Why Don't You Sell the Way That I Buy? And so that sales training program was taken into a Fortune 100 company. And when we implemented that in the pilot, it was in a foreign country, is that they were able to increase their sales by 30% by just starting to understand the nuances of buying and selling styles. Now, we integrated sales steps, which are standard out there, but it was the most popular program that they had ever done in the history of this Fortune 100 company.
Yeah.
Because people, sales reps, no matter where they're at, they understand the importance of these preferences, and then sales manager says, I realize why Terry or Ken aren't doing certain things, because that's not their preference. And how do I attach that? And then you can even determine what are some profiles of maybe your highest performers as well.
Yeah, well, one of the things we learned was if you allow people to make a choice to do things that they love doing and that they're naturally good at and they prefer to do, well, their performance level goes up. So salespeople, if they understand their style and they understand their customer's style better, they can better match their approach to fit their customers' buying needs. And that, as you said, increases the satisfaction of the customer and the motivation of the customer to do business with that salesperson.
Well, it has been a very powerful tool here for us at CRG, and when people embrace it, they just say, oh, wow. After the sales style indicator, was it the values or self-worth or stress? Which one was the one that was after that?
Probably the stress came first. I'm quite sure it did. And I partnered with a person who was the director of a stress and health center at a hospital in California to develop that. And
now, sorry to interrupt, but what was your thinking? Why did you even have the desire to put this together? What was...
Okay, well, I just realized that since many of the students that I teach are going to work in the criminal justice system, that they have high levels of stress and that they have health concerns that maybe most jobs don't really have that kind of stress. And
certainly not at that level.
Right. So I felt there was a need for this tool. And when I talked to this person who had experience really even in a hospital setting helping people do cardiac rehab, and like that's a major life event, a major stressor, and all of the things that lead up to people having heart attacks. She was really experienced in helping these people and understood the dimensions and the health factors that were involved in their getting sick, and also understood the factors that they needed to implement in order for them to get well. I just felt she was a great partner. I had the development of the assessment tools, skills, and she had the knowledge we needed to bring into this tool. So we partnered again to develop the stress indicator and health planner.
And then, so for the uniqueness of the tool, and of course we've contributed to the latest version and it's expanded even further, is that when people use the tool, it's the longest tool that CRG has, meaning it has 120 questions in it. But one of the things that and I'm not sure what your thinking was behind it, but the clients really appreciate the fact that we have 5 sections in it. And each section measures stress around a specific area, a focus area. If it's interpersonal skills or interpersonal stress, if it's around your nutritional or lifestyle questions, if it's around time, if it's around work. And so what was the thinking behind just separating it in that way?
Well, once again, we want it to be holistic and not just address one slice of this potential causes of stress. We wanted a person to be able to assess all the areas of stress that might be impacting them instead of just 1 or 2.
Okay. And so the response of that has just been amazing in those. So any experiences about where the stress indicator and health planner has been very impactful with a group?
Of course. I mean, we see it happening with students at university who are going into a criminology profession. Health and wellness professionals have used it to help their clients. Doctors have used it to help their clients. It's wherever anybody wants to become more well or prevent themselves from getting sick, it's had that kind of application.
Well, personally at CRG, one of our best clients that have been using the tool is a very large retailer, several thousand employees. And what they've actually used it is a front end of an EAP, or Employee Assistance Program, where it's a preventative measure. So if anybody that's watching this segment is that the stress indicator and health planner is a foundational piece or a very powerful piece to any kind of health initiative or stress reduction initiative within an organization. And now we see more and more that health and wellness is such at a critical crossroads. We were in such dire wellness levels or poor health levels in the developed world that we need now to address it at all levels. There was a research study done actually in Canada just last year, just a few months ago, and they said the number one factor that was contributing to their stress was work. And that it was well over 50% who felt stress or very high stress levels. So this is not an insignificant factor. And the UK government established that stress is costing the UK economy 10% of its GDP. And the US Labor Department established it at $7,500 per employee per year in stress-related illnesses. So it's very timely that that tool is there and you put it together, but you were being visionary about putting it together years ago and just continuing to refine it, and CRG is putting the latest research on nutrition and that into the tool to keep it dated with all the new research that's coming out. So after the stress indicator and health planner, was it the self-worth or the values that then?
Values.
The values preference. And so you had a relationship with Everett Robinson, who also is a professor and he was a teacher. And so the values, where did that come out of, or what was the discussion point there to develop the values preference indicator?
I guess it's just one more thing that students realized that they needed to know about themselves. And once we started asking students, well, I was asking them to write a paper, for example, as a required paper called a personal foundation paper. And in that paper, they had to identify their beliefs, their values, their personal vision, their goals, both educational and career goals, and lifestyle plan. Well, one of the struggles they had was to identify and prioritize their values, because their values really are a measure of what's really most important to them. And so they didn't have a way to do that. I looked at some other values assessment tools. Once again, they tended to emerge out of the psychometric literature and not out of the learning and communication literature. So I just said, okay, let's just make it. Let's do it. Let's make one. And let's keep refining it, do this continuous improvement approach on it over the years, and as you have continued to do since you took over the company.
Well, one of the things that happens is the values preference indicator is now the second most popular tool after the PSI. And every time, I mean every time that somebody takes it, it's a powerful experience. And one of the things that we explain is that it's behavioral values, the grid on fears and needs, but it's internal motivators that if these elements or these pieces are not part of my life, then there's a void or a lack of fulfillment that happens. So the insight and the creation of it was amazing. And then even the matrix, which is part of the values, where you compare every value to every other value 5 times, so you make almost 300 decisions on that single page, and it helps people to get connected to that.
And it just increases the accuracy level of the prioritization that takes place.
Yeah, just a very powerful experience in that, and just people right away. There's nobody ever pushes back on values. They get that, and no matter what culture, where they come from, they right away say, I understand values and values prioritization, and with all the pressure that we have in society about trying to choose one thing over the other, this links into hiring, fulfillment, performance, all those things as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and team development. I've used that tool working with executive teams to help them understand why they have values clashes, or where they can agree on what their values, their team values are. And that creates team synergy and enhances team performance. And we left it open-ended so that the values preference indicator doesn't lock people in to a limited set of 21 values. If they have other values that don't happen to be on the list, they can add them and put them in the correct priority according to their own sense of what's real to them.
Exactly. And the other thing is there's things like what I call contextual values, like family. We don't have that on the list, so there are other values that people can add to it. So that's, like you said, it's open-ended to really be inclusive versus exclusive or defined. It's really more of an open box to be able an opportunity to engage.
Right. And once again, we're not pigeonholing anybody.
Yeah, and that's why people just love that tool.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of my favorites for sure. Now, after that was self-worth. And that is part of our holistic model when we talk about personal style, biophysical factors, but and values and social teachers. But another one is self-worth. Now, this is an area that most people don't want to talk about in the corporate world, but how did that come to be or to be unfold?
Well, once again, when I've, for 37 years now, been preparing people to go work as various kinds of officers in police and immigration and customs and correctional settings, as well as my consulting work with businesses, self-worth is like a touchy, delicate, difficult thing to talk about, and yet it really has an impact on people's performance and their morale, particularly as they get into higher stress environments and they get into more negativity in their environments. I mean, try going into a prison and working there for 5 years and maintaining your sense of self-worth in such a negative environment. It's very difficult. So you need to be able to be aware of what you're basing your worth on, and you need to be able to self-affirm that in order to validate it and to not get blown off center by high levels of stress.
Well, one of the unique designs about the self-worth inventory is that, again, it has categories, or what we call situational self-worth. So what was the thinking behind that? Because that's breakthrough, that I can actually have contextual or situational self-worth, high self-worth here and low self-worth there, based on the context. So where did that come from?
That came out of Everett's counseling background and practice, and his observations of different people in different environments. And I think it was a brilliant contribution that he made to make that distinction.
And so just so that people that are watching, is that we're able to identify in 5 different categories your level of self-worth, but also we break self-worth down into self-concept, self-esteem, how I think and feel about myself. And all the latest literature is now linking performance into self-worth, as well as my ability to make decisions that are affirming to myself has this linkage to my self-worth level. So if I have low self-worth, then I might not engage or take a risk on a new career, or change jobs even though I really hate the one that I have right now.
Or take a promotion even though my supervisor is asking me to apply for it.
So so all those things are linked to it. And the other one is sometimes we have a category in work. People link their worth on what they do, not who they are.
Yeah, and we really thought that was an important distinction to make, because anybody who's working in difficult environments, and sometimes difficult environments can be sales environments, sometimes they can be entrepreneurial, sometimes they can be
in a hospital,
criminal justice or hospital environments. They need to be able to affirm their worth regardless of what their performance happened to be today. Sometimes you have to perform and perform and perform without a reward for a long period of time, especially in these kinds of environments we're talking about.
Or on the extreme where I lose my job, and all of a sudden my connection
Right.
of my worth is to what I'm doing versus who I am. So that's great. So again, so we have the self-worth inventory as a very powerful tool. After that, did we get into the leadership or the learning style, or I can't remember.
It was
what-
leadership first, and at that point in 1990, I published the first edition of Transforming Leadership, which was a result of the research that I did during my PhD work. And the leadership skills inventory was actually built into the first edition of the book. So the person would assess themselves on all of the leadership skills that we'd validated from the literature were best practices in both business and other environments such as health and criminal justice and military and so on.
Right.
They had an opportunity to self-assess their skills while they were learning about leadership theory. So by the time they finished reading the book, they would have a leadership development plan.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a breakthrough. This hadn't been done before as far as we could see in any of the literature that we surveyed, and we surveyed everything that we could find. And I did it for 6 years. I surveyed that literature while I was writing my PhD dissertation.
And the leadership skills, and we think about sort of when we're doing this video shoot, is that leadership, or the lack of it, is at a critical stage globally. And in spite of all the other books that have been written, and we'll go in depth in another segment, Terry, in this, but there still is not a competency model based on, at least on what we know, out there that brings all the competencies or the skills I need into one place to be able to develop a leader.
Yeah, and I think the critical distinction here is that the skills that I'm talking about in the book are transferable skills. They're visible, they're observable, they're behaviorally based, they're practicable. And I can help somebody learn them and give them feedback on the extent to which they're actually developing them and performing them well. That enables me as a leader to move into the role of coach and trainer on the job.
Mm-hmm.
That was missing before.
And you teach these. You've been teaching hundreds, if not thousands of hours of this, because you do this with your students every semester.
14,000 students so far. Yeah.
And so each one of them, coaching through them, I know that you videotape them, you get the feedback,
Yeah.
and then really these are tools or the skill sets. There are 5 sections for people that are curious. There's 5 sections in the leadership skills inventory. There's a precursor to it where we talk about principles, and that's what are my belief systems about leadership, and then the skills each build in one another. So there's self-management, interpersonal, the counseling and problem management, or coaching as we put into there now, the consulting, or really the team elements, and then the organizational development and versatility.
Yeah.
And each of them, as you put it together, have a gradient value. They get more sophisticated, more complicated as you move down the track.
Yes, exactly.
And these are not things that you do overnight.
No, it's years.
Years.
But you can find out where you're at now by completing the leadership skills inventory or reading the book. Leadership skills inventory is the fast way to do it. And now, with the new 360, you can ask other people to give you feedback, and you can see where they think you're at on those 60 skills.
Yeah, that's a new process that's available now where you can go and you get, well, the others has always been there,
Yeah.
but it's now digitally able to kind of have that interaction back and forth and get feedback from others about what they think about how my skills are showing up in the context of our job and our relationship. And so those become very, very powerful coaching tools to be able to go to the next level. That's the other thing about the work here, is that the 360 or the leadership is not for punitive measure. It is to developmental, establish where I'm at, and if I want to succeed or to improve my success or my performance, then here are the factors, here are the skills I need to look at to be able to do it.
And when I do executive coaching, one of the biggest benefits is not only do executives find that their performance is enhanced at work, but when they go home, they take those same skills home with them. And they're improving their relationships with their spouses and their family members and their friends in areas where previously they had blind spots, where they just didn't know what they were doing and the impact it was having on other people.
Because we take our skills to wherever we go. So, I'm not a big believer in work and home values or skills. You take your skill set wherever you go. And so that's the dual benefit of doing any of this work.
And if I'm unskilled, it's the dual curse.
Yeah, of course. And then home can then go back to work, and there's disaster there as well. I think finally we have, there's a whole bunch of other tools, but the last one that in the assessment set is the instructional style. I'll come to the QSI here in a second, but the instructional style and learning style were then developed as a package, both offering there. So we looked at that, but the learning style and instructional style have a separate measurement or a different model for learning styles than many of the other ones out there. Most of the other ones are based on the NLP of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
But we added another piece in that, which was the independent learner. So tell us about where the learning style and the instructional style, sort of the genesis of it.
Well, after reviewing the other models for learning style awareness and development, we just saw, Everett and I had a conversation, and we saw that dimension was missing, and we wanted to include it and amplify it, make it more accessible to a wider range of people.
Now, one of the things that's unique about the learning style tool, instructional style, not sure if you thought about it in advance, is that a person's personal style, we believe, stays fairly consistent throughout their lifetime. But they might get a different learning style profile or pattern than their personal style. Why is that in our model?
It's just happens in reality that people may have a personal style, but they may have different learning preferences or factors depending on their background, their experience, and the kind of instructor they happen to have. So all of these factors intermix to produce a kind of a preference for a learning style. Even if I happen to be very cognitively oriented, I may prefer a very expressive teacher just because that motivates me more, because that inspires me more. And so we just allowed them to express their preferences, once again, without pigeonholing them or telling them that they have to fit into a preconceived box.
And so our definition is how I prefer to really acquire knowledge, how would I prefer to engage knowledge, and that it's unique to each person and not necessarily linked to my MBTI or DISC or PSI score. It could be independent of that. And that's one of the things in our model, is that we actually identify the independent learner. And if we describe learning in the last 20 years, is that finally universities have caught on the fact that there is this blended learning model, this independent learner that wants to maybe take different ways, so I can have online courses, joint courses with individuals, all those things. Just a short story, Terry, is that, as you might know, is my wife Brenda works at a university as an academic coach, and they're using the learning style indicator as part of their coaching tool for the students. Mm-hmm. And the coaching that they're doing is with individuals who are, some of them are struggling with their marks, and so the coaching is a requirement for them so that they can get their study skills up. Other ones are with athletes who have a lot of demands where they have to keep their scholarships. But overall, and they're not exactly at this number, but by coaching the individuals and bringing learning style into that mix, on average, they're getting a full grade point increase in the students' performance.
Mm-hmm. I can believe that, just from my own experience of using it in my classes. I teach a student success course for first-year students, and I wrote a textbook for that, and I also bring in the learning styles indicator. And it's clear that once students understand their preferences for learning, they're more careful in selecting instructors they're more likely to learn from, or more careful to select an instructor who will challenge them to develop a new learning style so that they're more versatile in their ability to learn.
And now the other side of this is the instructional style indicator, which is those of us that teach and educate and share knowledge with others, is an accountability to us about, in the title that Everett created, why don't you teach the way that I learn? That a lot of times educators or certain individuals, instructors, pardon me, are stuck in a certain learning style or teaching style, and that is maybe disconnecting from some of the learners.
It's disconnecting from a lot of the learners, because the standard, typical style being used in high school and university is the lecture method. And when students are asked how they prefer to learn, that isn't first. It often even isn't second. They prefer to be engaged, to be interactive, to be hands-on, to learn by doing, because they're adult learners. And the research is clear on adult learning, that adults prefer to learn by doing something that is personally relevant and has application in their lives or their careers. They do not prefer the rote memorization method. They don't prefer the linear cognitive approach to learning that they don't see the connection in real life for.
And this is an accountability, but sometimes, as we know, and you're a tenured professor, so I'm not picking on you, but tenure then sometimes erodes accountability to be able to do these things. And
they just don't know.
Just don't know.
It's not their fault. They just don't know that they have other options, and they haven't been challenged to consider and to develop the other options either. And I think the learning styles inventory really, the ones that I've seen go through completing it, they have a wake-up call to realize all of a sudden, wow, this is how I've been teaching all this time, and I didn't even know I could teach those other ways. So it opens up new horizons, and it helps them to develop a new learning plan for their own professional development.
And in how powerful that can be, because really we're in a learning and knowledge economy now. And so learning is continuous. It's never going to stop. And so anybody watching this, you need to know what your learning style is, period, as a baseline, so that you can capture and gain knowledge at the best way that serves you, and how you can kind of expand your knowledge base in a way that's not burdensome, but also an enlightening to you.
I think so.
Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of stuff, Terry, in this segment for sure, and just the power of all the tools. There was one other tool that we created, which was the Quick Style Indicator. And the Quick Style Indicator is simply the water, I will call it the PSI light, the Personal Style Indicator light. And so we developed that with a lower read level, a little bit simpler in that process. So that was simply an opportunity to get into educational market as well as literacy, so that I could have the cognitive skills to discern what each of these categories mean in the word list. I think that was the intent of that, was it not?
Yeah, we wanted someone in, even down to the 6th grade level, to be able to think about and talk about their personal style and how they prefer to act and how they prefer to interact with other people and how they manage stress and how they function when they're with a team. Why would we want to not allow someone younger to access this information? So it was originally created for them, but what's happened is that people who are in career planning programs, prisoners, life skills training programs are now using this with people who have lower reading levels. And it allows them to access the same kind of information that they get with the Personal Style Indicator, except just not presented in such a complex or sophisticated way.
So, and it just really opened the opportunity for people to be able to engage that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Terry. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know we covered a lot of information about the array of tools and the holistic model and approach. But it isn't just about style at CRG. It's about all of these things, how they come together to be able to serve you. So we appreciate you watching. And hopefully we'll be able, if you have any questions about any of the things that we talked about, please feel free to contact us. We love to serve you.